Setting up the meeting. Good. I think we're in. Oh my God, that's amazing. Right. Hi, Sindhoor.
Yes. Hi.
How are you? Great to see you today. Thank you so much. What time is it in India now?
4:32 p.m.
Oh, hang on. What that was? Sorry, darling. Sorry, I missed that. Sorry. What time is it there?
4:32 p.m.
Oh, yes, it's coming into evening. Well, great. I've just been so excited about today. I know a lot of other people have as well. We've got a lot to talk about, so we might go over the hour a little bit, but we'll try and keep it within that. But just so people know, we don't know each other that well, but we've got to know each other a bit more recently. And we had a wonderful conversation off air before, and we're going to be talking a bit about your book today as we talk through. But when I read your book, it was just so wonderful. It was a really warm, accessible narrative. It made me feel that I know you a lot better, because it's a very personal piece, isn't it, really? And we're going to touch on that a little bit today. But also, I think for many people who are starting to think about things differently and to reevaluate behavior more widely, actually, about what it actually is, but also our relationship with dogs and what they try and communicate, I found it hugely validating and just very inspiring. So I'm really chuffed to have you here today, Sindhoor. Really pleased. So I always like to start with inviting people just to tell us a little bit about themselves, but also their journey into where they are now, because a lot of people, the feedback I get, that's a bit that a lot of people find really interesting, because it'll either mirror their own side of things, or it will kind of give them a kind of more of an idea about who you are and how you went on that journey to be where you are now, thinking about dogs. So yeah, share that with us, Sindhoor.
Okay. So first up, thank you so much for having me here. And I know we're going to be talking about street dogs. This is a topic I love talking about. So anytime someone invites me over to talk about street dogs, I just feel so grateful. So thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. So about me, I have lived in India all my life, and I did my education here. I graduated as a computer science engineer, and I worked in a small little company that you may have heard of, Yahoo, which kind of rest its soul in peace, I suppose. But engineering is really my background. I spent several years there, and then I started kind of looking for things to do outside of engineering, because I really wanted to get out of the corporate world. So I was looking for things to do, and around that time, it so happened that my dog Nishi, she was less than a year old, and she met with an accident. A terrible accident. A car ran over her face, and I'm surprised that she made it. I'm surprised that she lived through that. But I knew enough about dogs to say, hey, this is going to leave a big emotional scar on her. I better do something. I better figure out what I need to do. And I can't train emotional scars and trauma out of an animal. So I really, my journey into this started with looking for answers to help her cope with something so terrible and quite tremendous, actually. So I think one thing led to another, and I got an opportunity to spend time with Turid. Actually live in her home in Norway. I must gloat about it, because apparently not too many people get a chance to do that. So I got to learn from her, not just in a classroom setting, but really observe her, the way she led her life with her dog, right? And I think that was really transformational for me. It kind of, up until then, I had been reading up about different kinds of training and trying different things with the dog, with my dog, and I had strong opinions with, despite knowing so little about things. And then I met Turid, and I saw how she was living with her dog, and it was so profound that it actually took me a few years after to unpack what I had seen, to really figure out what it is that I had witnessed over there. She said a few things, and there were these key takeaways. Okay, don't use a collar, use a harness, and those kind of stuff. But that wasn't it. She was living her life with her dogs in a very interesting way. she would often say, Sindhoor, why do you keep telling people two rids way? I don't have any technique. It's not like a new training technique. And it took me a while to realize that it wasn't a technique, it wasn't a method, it was a philosophy. She was living an interesting philosophy. And that took a certain amount of maturity, introspection, and difficult questions to ask of myself. Things I had to expose to myself about how I was thinking about the other. And the interesting thing is, when you start looking at it, the other is always the other. It's not necessarily another species. It could be other people, but there's a way of looking at the other, right? And that is what I started kind of realizing. So it wasn't easy, but I think that kind of started me on this journey of looking at dogs very differently, people very differently. I came back and I started consulting, and then I did meet her again in the US. I spent a year learning from her. I did myotherapy with the guys at Garland in the UK. So all of these little things, but I think they all kind of reinforced more and more of what I had now come to understand about kind of the way of life that I wanted for myself with my dogs and the people around me, and my life in general. It wasn't about this is the way, it's a prescriptive way. No, it felt in congruence with how I viewed myself as somebody I wanted to be with the world around me. So I think they all reinforce themselves. So now, after a few years of consulting, we run a diploma program. We have a school to teach others what I kind of learned, because I felt like consulting was very kind of, it's great, it's important, and there's a need for it, but I really felt like I needed to talk about the big picture, the full picture. That's really what was interesting for me. So that's where we're at.
So there's a few things that's really, what a really interesting story, and what a privilege I had to be able to share space and time with Turid at a time when she was really doing a lot of that. I love the way that you said that Turid said it's more of a, well, you felt it's more of a philosophy really, and more of an outlook. And I think there's a couple of things you said there I just want to touch on before we move on. First of all, everybody I've spoken to, whether it's people on these chats or just chatting in general, it's amazing how we have that one life experience, or that one dog, or that one situation that kind of almost makes us have to think beyond the norm. Yeah. Beyond just the kind of good, bad behavior, reward, punish behavior, thinking about behavior as being more about an expression of self from our animal and how we need to support that. And this notion that you described there beautifully about how actually when we start to think about behavior differently, we have to have that as an introspective first, because we are all kind of conditioned a little bit into this good, bad, punish, reward. We have a lot of the conformality of the society around us that puts expectations on things. So that part of the brain that's very quick to judge behavior and want to kind of pigeonhole certain things and stereotype certain things, it takes a lot to move away from that and to think, well, actually, what does this mean about me as an individual and how I viewed others and how I viewed others' behaviors? It's quite a profound process to go through, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, and I think we shouldn't forget that I think we're definitely conditioned to look at the world in black and whites. So we have this extreme discomfort with, all the shades of gray, and we have an extreme discomfort with being anywhere where, you're either happy or sad, they both can't exist together. You're either right or wrong. You can't be both, good or bad. And so, and we're constantly trying to, put people in boxes. We're trying to put our dogs in boxes. So when you start understanding and accepting, I think that was primarily the thing, that I had to be okay with seeing my dog for who she is, and not just okay, learn to celebrate that. I think once that's the thing I mentioned in the book, right? And once I started to do that, then I was able to see, it was like the power of this thing is incredible, because the fog lifts and you see, oh my goodness, she is a dog so incredible that there's no amount of training I could have put in to have achieved that. She's capable of so much, but it's not something I can see if I'm constantly trying to fit her into this box. I can't get past this box. This is what I want her to be. And the fact that she is not that is just a thorn in the side, right? Like, I can't look past it. So I think that idea of let it go, let that go, ask yourself, why do you have this box that you're trying to fit her into, and let her go, and let that idea go, and just see her. And I think the reason it's so transformational is once you start doing that, you start doing that with people too. That's really when you realize that's what I've been doing with people. You either agree with me, or I put you in this box. This box of, I don't like you because you haven't agreed with me. But if I let that go, and then I start looking past, my expectations of you, something tremendous emerges. And more recently, I was mentioning to you, I'm doing my master's in anthropology, and been reading up a lot about just different ways different people understand the world. The epistemology of different people, which is how do they relate with the world around them. And this black and white classification is not necessarily something everybody does. It's a very cultural thing. We've been taught to do that. I've grown up also with a very Western education. So, this is something that was so inbuilt in me, this black and white thinking, to realize that there are people who are so comfortable with gray areas. It really makes you sit up and think about, why is this black and white thinking so valid? Why are we so desperate to make our dogs all fit into this image of the perfect dog that we got from what, Hollywood? I don't know.
That's really interesting. So then when we were talking off air about the pressures on us, especially with a kind of a Western society, Western educational system for sure, to start to see things in a very binary way. And we as an industry, as a community, have to take some of the responsibility of this over the many years, because we've put a big emphasis on training. We're not, remember, none of this is about saying not to train, but I think the big thing you said there about your realization with Nishi is this: the expectation shifts from us to the dog to us. We've had to go through this with Molly. The expectation is on us. The expectation to keep her safe, to learn from her, to give her the opportunity to share her truth with us. Yeah. And this thing about being available to the truth of another, we discussed this when we were discussing off air a few weeks ago, is actually a really wondrous process when you start to allow that to happen. And it's not easy sometimes, because we all have our own biases and our own judgments, and we have to navigate those sometimes. And also, of course, it's okay not to be available to the truth of somebody sometimes if we find that particularly difficult, and that's okay too. But we used that word truthful earlier, about just being a bit more truthful about this, about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to engage with. And the thing that really hit me from the book was just how personal it felt. It was almost, I almost felt like I was reading a diary at times. It had that kind of feel to me. And I think that shows this, we all like a bit of the academic science stuff, and that's important. But actually this comes down to a kind of a really raw, deep connection with another. We just happen to be talking about another species here. Yeah. And a lot of what you're learning from your anthropology course, from what you were telling me off air, has really helped to build even deeper into this notion of how we have that relationship with animals. You were talking about how you compared with some of our indigenous peoples and how they connect with Mother Nature and animals in general. It's more truthful, isn't it? It's more connected.
So, I think, of course, all generalizations are not a great idea, right? So we're going to have that caveat in place when we discuss other cultures and put it into one bucket. Not all of them are going to fit into that. But definitely, I think there are lessons to be learned when we look at cultures outside of our own, what we're used to. And for me in India, it's really interesting because my education system belongs to one culture, my upbringing belongs to another, my parents' lives belongs to another. So we kind of, and we have access to different kinds of people around. So just having those conversations is really interesting. But I think that there are other ways to connect with the other. I think this, not all cultures have this idea of human exceptionalism, which is to say that, just the way when I connect with another human being, it's not a concept that I'm connecting with. It's that individual that I'm connecting with. And I think the same thing with animals. I don't have to, put them all into a bucket and say, I love, dogs and I'm connecting with dogs. I mean, yes, of course, many of us do love dogs, but the connection is with the individual, to be able to see the individual. So this course is really interesting for me, because I think until I did this course, I was rather fascinated by the ethograms of animals, and that's something that I did do, is research and publish an ethogram, not in a peer-reviewed journal, of course, but and it was fascinating for me until I realized that when we look at things like ethograms, for example, we're looking at the least common denominator of what the species can do, right? But it is the individual and what they can do that matters. And so, in fact, I think last Sunday I was talking to my professor, and I said, when we look at what human beings do, we say humans can scale the Everest, they can go to the moon. How many of us have done that? Like 2-3 of to not even less than a 0.1%, not even, right? So there's so few individuals who are actually doing this. But when it comes to dogs, if I say, a dog can do this, immediately the question is it replicable? Do all dogs do it? They do it in all conditions? Where is the data to prove it? Why are those two different standards? Why do we not see that they are individuals, and every individual could be capable of extraordinary things that other individuals are not capable of? Why do we see them as a blur, like a soft toy? Every one of them has to fit into this model, right? And every one of them has to do this exact same thing. So I think that's kind of what has come out in the book, is my journey to see Nishi not as a dog, not as a boxer, not as a a trauma survivor, but as an individual. And what came out of it was deep growth, to be able to connect with the other like that. And to a great extent, we do this with humans, don't we? We have these statements, oh, the people of this country or this race, they are like this, as if the whole lot of them are one, represented by one trait. So I think seeing that was very humbling for me, to extend that to see that I do tend to do this with humans too. So you got to look past it.
I think that's important, because when we talk about behavior as an expression of self, it is just that. And I think so. Nishi was all those things that you described, but more, because of the kind of unique and personal existence that she then lived. And I love when you were talking there about the kind of climbing mountains and going on the moon. If you imagine like an alien comes along, like, oh yeah, humans, they climb mountains and they go to the moon. It's like, well, I haven't climbed a mountain, I haven't been to the moon. But I think that's really interesting. It's a really good way of looking at it. This is the interesting thing when we think about your work observing street dogs. I think you're in quite a unique position, really, and as far as you get the chance to do these observations with street dogs, which we'll talk about now, but then also you've supported people who have taken these dogs into a domestic setting, and the kind of and the challenges that possesses for that. So it's interesting to see both sides. But thinking about street dogs, the one thing that I get from having read your work is the one side thinking about the dynamic of a street dog, that is the generalization, but then homing in on the individuals and how they are, and recognizing their individual personalities and how they connect and that kind of thing. So share with us about your work with street dogs.
Right. So I think, I started observing street dogs when I was studying with Turid, because she said a few things about dogs that kind of completely, sort of all these things that I had read about them, all these notions that I had about them kind of just fell through, particularly the things that she mentioned about their activity budget. How long do they spend time being active? And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions I have seen out there in terms of what people think in terms of activity budget of dogs. Like most largish mammals, they are quite lazy animals. They're not hyperactive animals, actually. They spend the bulk of their time lazing. And I think this is something that I myself had these ideas about. And when Turid kept saying, that's not really the case, I being the, evidence-driven engineer that I am, I said, okay, I need to go get data on this myself because, I don't buy this. So that's kind of where it started. It was a bit of an act of defiance, quite honestly. uh, and well, I didn't have the last laugh, or I don't know. But I think that's where it started. Of course, my first job was to look at activity budgets. That kind of led me to some version of an ethogram. And since then, I've learned a few interesting things apart from having learned their activity budget. A lot of dogs are incredibly flexible animals, and I think that comes across when you actually start looking at different studies done on free ranging dogs in different parts of the world. You see such drastically different statements, such drastically different observed behaviors. Just the ontology of these dogs are so different, based on not just where they are or what resources they have access to, but it also seems to be, so in India alone, we see this, it seems heavily driven by politics of the state. And that's because the politics of the state drive how people treat these dogs. And so they're different, they behave different. I'm pretty sure if we actually started looking at it, we'd see very different ethograms emerge as well. In countries where they're persecuted, where they don't, in India, they're constitutionally protected. So they have the right to live where they live, and we can't either kill them or relocate them. So that's illegal. We have to let them be. And so when we go to countries where they don't have that kind of protection, or if there's a cultural or a religious or a political reason why they are kind of persecuted, you see that they're very different. And so I think that has gotten me thinking about, this idea of a dog, right? This box that we want to put them into again, which is they're so flexible. How do we come back and report that this is their social structure? But it's not. It changes from group to group, from country to country, from state to state. I see this change, and to say, okay, this is their diet, this is their this is who they are in terms of what activities they do, how they procure food. We see this changes so much, and I think that is one thing that's at the heart of dogs, highly flexible animals. So I think that's been the second big realization. And finally, now that I'm looking at, sort of trans-species ethnographs rather than ethograms, I'm beginning to see them as individuals, and my mind is just blown. I think I need a whole other 2 days to talk about that.
This is really interesting. I discovered so much you just said there that we could spend another hour just unpacking on that, I know. But this is interesting because when we start to think more about dogs as being the individual, and actually dogs may act and behave in certain ways because of various pressures that they're under, depending on the environment they're in. But underneath that is the dog and what they might do if they didn't have to have those pressures, and how they might act if they didn't have to compensate for this or do that. This is a big challenge for us as a professional community then, of course, because and even for legislators, I guess, or anything really from a societal point of view, because we do like to kind of think, well, this is what a dog does and this is what a dog needs. Kim Brophy talks in her TED talk about how we've over commercialized this notion of the pet, and then created industries around it, because of course you've got to buy that food and you've got to have that haircut or whatever, whatever goes on. So this provides some challenges, and not least for the dog owner, for the dog carer now, because there might have been a bit of comfort and surety behind some of the old perceived wisdoms, behind some of the norms. So it is mind-blowing on many levels. I don't know about you, but I go from so excited and inspired to completely overwhelmed with this stuff, cyclically,
Yeah. Absolutely. It's very, and I keep saying this is very humbling, and there's a reason for it, right? So I'm just back from a 10-day vacation. And when we were on the vacation, it was, we were doing a farm stay, and my dog Chiru, 2 of my students had turned up there with their dog Harvey, and we badly wanted Chiru and Harvey to be friends. That didn't really go very well. She wasn't interested in being friends with her. And I was disappointed. I mean, it did bother me that, you don't want to be friends with somebody I want you to be friends with, because if you both got along, then my students get to spend more time in my house with their dog. So this is a very convenient friendship, but it's convenient for me and I badly wanted her to have it. Now, does that mean that she has a problem? Does she have a social problem? Not at all, because, I mean, I'm sure you saw the video and I have more videos coming up. She was very, very good with some of the other dogs. In fact, it was very fascinating to watch her, because there were about 8 dogs on the property, 7 of who were happy to be friends with Chiru, and she wanted to have nothing to do with the 7 of them. One dog, this guy called Bhishma, kept growling at her, didn't really want her near him. He just wanted to be left alone. He's a estate dog, free ranging dog. So he didn't really think very highly of her. That's the one dog she wanted to be friends with desperately. And I do have a video that I will be putting up pretty soon. She's actually performing a dance for him. It was ridiculous for me to watch the whole thing. And I knew then, I mean, he would come right up to her face and growl, and she knew how to handle him so well that this is not a dog who doesn't have social skills. She doesn't need my help, but she has an opinion. She wants that guy. I don't know why, but that's the guy she wants to be friends with. And when I thought back to all the vacations we've been on, I suddenly realized, oh my God, this is a repeating pattern. I have this video with at least 3 other dogs where you're desperately trying to get the attention of the one dog on the property who doesn't want to be friends with you. That's who she is. And so I think, absolutely, I think this whole thing is extremely humbling for me to actually have to realize that, okay, you may not be the dog I want you to be, but that doesn't make you a bad dog. That just makes you an individual. And don't we have certain choices like that too? Maybe our parents didn't approve of it, our friends don't approve of it, but we do.
Well, my parents, I definitely didn't end up as my parents wanted me, but yeah, I think and it is humbling, and it's a realization. And I think that some people, and I do get it. I get the human psychology behind this, and what we invest into this perception of dogs, and what they need to us. So many people get a dog that hasn't even arrived yet, but they're already decided this dog's going to do this for me, or we're going to do this activity together. And the dog hasn't even arrived yet. We haven't even learned from that dog. Yeah. Something you said there about your experiences there, sorry, is for me, one of the big things for me is this thing about individual processing and social processing, especially, and how important that is for the individual to go through a kind of an authentic threat evaluation, social processing procedure that makes sense, right? Because wouldn't make sense just to be going around loving everybody.
Yeah.
And even with and what you're describing there is this notion that this expectation we have that dogs should somehow be friendly to every dog they meet and every person they meet, without giving them chance to kind of work stuff out and think, actually, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to engage that notion of social consent.
Yeah.
And some of the work I've read of yours and seen videos wise of with the street dogs, and seeing how that plays out there, and how they're really good at avoiding situations, how they slow stuff down, how that, from your things that I've read, there is an implication there that they're better at self-regulating through that nervous system and giving them a chance to process and work stuff out before they go charging in.
Absolutely. Definitely, I see that they're much better at emotional regulation. Again, this is a generalization. We are going to find probably a few individuals who are not, but in general, they do better. And I suppose that's because they're in the environment that they kind of evolved to be part of, which is kind of scavenging around, in and around human beings. And that's kind of what they evolved to be. And we do get to see the best of them, because they need to bring out the best of themselves to survive there. And so, and we know that dogs are hypersocial animals. And when we look at social animals, anywhere, across the board, we do, I mean, just think back to your, either Discover National Geographic videos or whatever. when when social lives of animals are being documented, you see that richness in there, which means that you're going to see that there are friends and foes, and the dynamic changes across them. There's politics, there is sort of the full range. It's just fascinating, especially when we view this in primates. But it does happen in dogs too, maybe not to the same extent, I don't know, maybe not very similarly, but we do see that richness, we do see that variety. But somehow when it comes to dogs in our homes, we expect them to drop all that and have this kind of uniform I love you, the way Walt Disney dogs are supposed to do. I'm going to walk into the dog park and I'm going to be okay with every other dog there. But that's just not what social beings do. I mean, we may do that in parties because that's our social conditioning, but not all animals do that. They don't walk into a room full of strangers and they're expected to be instantly okay with everybody, otherwise we're going to train the living daylights out of them till they are. Where do they get to experience the full wealth of the social experiences? Where do we get to see their extraordinary communication skills in terms of negotiation, in terms of like you mentioned, resolving issues without getting into conflict? And then we get upset if they're getting into conflict. Well, we never gave them an opportunity to do this. We never gave them an opportunity to engage in that kind of full experience. And I think we will not get to see or appreciate or enjoy what they're capable of if like you said, we already have this idea before the dog comes in, and that's where we're trying to fit them. Then you're not going to get to see how fascinating they are.
And that's really, you've explained that so wonderfully about giving the dog, that individual dog, the time and that space to play out their own social processing and their own preferences regarding social engagement. And I think it's a big thing. I personally think this is going to be the next big thing we look at, because obviously there's a big emphasis on pain and behavior at the moment, quite rightly. But I think social processing for me is the thing we've got to learn more about, because when we have these dogs, the general public, they get a puppy, they're being convinced that the thing they've got to do is train lots of stuff for that dog, that the dog has to be obedient when they're out, the dog can't do this, they can't do that. But we're actually taking away a really important time in that dog's life where they're learning what their own social processing and social preferences might be. I live on a beach here down in Devon. People bring their pups down, let the pup off. They think the pup's having a great time. They're just under so much social pressure. And we wonder why a lot of dogs here in the UK end up not being able to speak dog very well.
Yeah.
Intrinsically, they would know because they're a dog, but they're just in this socially over-aroused state a lot of the time that they can't make some of those better choices, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two issues to consider there. One is, or maybe there are more than two, but one is, of course, this the state of hyperarousal. I have not seen street dogs sort of in the state that our pet dogs are in. And in India, I get to compare both, right? Because some of these dogs are kind of adopted and move into homes, so I could literally can compare them. And pet dogs are most times in a state of extraordinary hyperarousal that I don't see street dogs in. And that makes sense that, in terms of good judgment, in terms of just letting their innate behaviors, especially the slower, more deliberate ones, like negotiation, communication, understanding nuance, those kind of not just behaviors, but cognitive abilities, they just can't happen if you're hyper aroused. And the other is, of course, communication at the end of the day is a skill that you practice and get better at over time by seeing how your conspecifics react to it. Are they getting the message? If not, do I need to find another way to say this? Do I need to find another way to express this? One of the things that we've been observing kind of with calming signals as well is dogs seem to have a preference on the kind of signals they use. So every individual seems to have, they have this repertoire, but there are certain parts of it that they seem to do better with. For example, some are based on sort of just the body of the dog. For example, lighter dogs tend to use more of blinking, whereas darker dogs will use more of lip licking. which makes complete sense. I look at Nishi's face, when she was alive, if she blinked, nobody would be able to see that. Least of all another dog. She was black, fully black. So I can see, and this is something we do in our class, is we compare the communication between multiple dogs, and we see such distinct differences. And I suspect that it is something that has developed. Does a dark dog know that they're black? Maybe not. But does a dark dog know that blinking has never worked? Probably yes. And that's a matter of practice. And how I communicate with the world is a matter of practice. It is a matter of lots of trial and error. We don't give them a chance to do that either. And the thing is, not only do we not give them an opportunity to do that, the only dogs with who most of the dogs with who we socialize them also seem to be hyper aroused. So they are not able to do their bit in terms of feedback either. And on top of all of this, we're busy trying to tell them, no, you got to do what I want you to do here. So train, be what I want you to be. So just where is the opportunity to get better at communication?
Such a strong, powerful point. And I think we discussed at the beginning about the importance of behavior as an expression of self, and the ability to be able to get the relief you need for that kind of expression of self. And we know that to be available to the truth of another, or to be available to support somebody else, the more elevated we are as an individual, the less able we are to be available to the needs of another. And that's got to be the same for the dogs, really, how we're talking about this is. And this is why many dogs find daycares or the dog park or the beach particularly difficult, because it's just lots of dogs in that aroused state who aren't necessarily that dog who charges over to the other dog, where in fact the dog potentially giving signals way back, hang on, back off a bit. They're not available to even see them, are they? Because they're so pumped up. And I think this is something we've really got to think about, especially when we think about supporting young dogs through adolescence, and what actually our priorities need to be during that adolescence for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think so. So like I mentioned, this is something that I've been thinking about. This week, I was kind of catching back on some of the papers I read about QBA and sort of, qualitative behavioral analysis and those kind of different kinds of analysis that's being used. These are kind of oldish papers, but they're used, behavior being used to analyze the welfare of an animal. Like you said, behavior is an expression of yourself. So, and these studies are, I think, largely used in captivity, like zoos and things like that. That's where they're actually, using these tools. And something there caught my attention, and I found that really interesting. So the paper said that, an animal is given an opportunity to engage with the environment, and we're expecting to see behaviors that are normal of the animal, and we expect the animal to engage with the artifacts in the environment in a way they would, in the wild. And if they're not, that's an indication of their self, which is, their health or their environment or their mental health or their physical health. Something is off with it. And I think what we do with pet dogs is, pet dogs are let's face it, they are also animals in captivity. I mean, it might feel uncomfortable to admit that, but it is true. I get to see that, right? There are the dogs with their freedom out there, and then there is my dog who, I'd like to think it's great captivity, but it's still captivity at the end of the day. We don't actually do these kind of welfare, behavior-based welfare analysis on them on a regular basis in our homes. So do we know whether our environment is right for them? Is it bringing out their best? Whether it is, puppies or old dogs or adult dogs, do we do analysis of this kind? And what's even more interesting is, even if we got down to do the analysis, we kind of fudge the numbers. And what I mean by that is, if my dog is not engaging with the environment in a way that she would do out there, given a free environment, do I go back and look at it saying, okay, is there a welfare issue here? Or am I saying, hey, hold on, I can just train that behavior into this dog, and we get it. You see, it doesn't seem fair. If I were doing the same thing in a national park, and I said, somebody came and said, hey, the animals that you're keeping are not engaging in behaviors that they do, when they have free will. So address the issue. And I say, hey, let me just give me a month. I'll train the behavior into the animal. You're going to see it anyway. So I don't have to go and look below that. So I think that's issue number one. And of course, issue number two, like you said, we are not in agreement on what is the normal behavior of a dog. And this is something that I see people have all kinds of ideas of it. I've seen people think that dogs are animals that are hunting and running around all the time. Where does this idea come from? I don't know. We observe the dogs here, and I've seen people dismissing off these studies as irrelevant, coming from impoverished parts of the world. But this is where they get to live the way they evolved. So we got to see that. And I think that's kind of where also our puppy, when we're bringing up puppies, we have this image in our head of what is right for the puppy. I do think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves two questions. One, where are we getting that from? Is that really representative? And two, how can we look at their behavior to evaluate their well-being if we're altering the behavior itself? So
yeah, this is
where do we go with that kind of, you see, it's shaky ground.
It is, but it's important that we really step back and think about this stuff, because for me, a lot of what we're talking about collectively as part of this thinking about things differently isn't about how we train, how we don't train. It's thinking about fundamentally about the individual dog and what we've done through a lot of control and coercion, actually, even through positive reinforcement, about getting behaviors that we want in place, and even behaviors that we perceive as being natural for the dog, but might have no value to that dog, and especially about how they cope and how they process. And I think we really have to fundamentally, we're going through it with Molly at the moment. She's 6 months now, but when she came to us, we took that decision. We're just going to go for it. We're going to learn from her. We're going to really build things up slowly. We're going to try and find out how she needs to process, and then provide the environment in such a way, which is difficult, I get, and it hasn't been without its challenges for us. But I'm seeing it with my own eyes, this wonderful expression of self from Molly, and we've done very little functional training or obedience training, what you might call it. We've just let her do things, and she's not some kind of wild dog who's just kind of acting like crazy. She's actually really mindful because we've given her a chance to actually stop and think about stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, won't you say that we'd benefit from doing that to ourselves to sort of slow down and think about it and be mindful? I think we don't, that's probably why we don't, think about it much with our dogs. It seems like a lot of us don't recognize the importance of this in ourselves. So maybe it's a far cry to expect it with our dogs.
And I think that's a really good point. I think one thing, we know that the kind of juvenile of many species is kind of designed to be dysfunctional, to dysregulate. Sorry, it's kind of designed to dysregulate. The brain just isn't there to provide a lot of self-regulation, and we have to learn to slow down. And we can all remember with our parents. I know with my father, he said to me a lot, look, slow down. This is why you're making mistakes. You need to slow down. You need to focus more. But then we end up finding ourselves in a society that wants to take away self. It wants to tell us you're this kind of woman, you're this kind of man, and this whole aspirational consumerism stops us necessarily from just slowing down and thinking, who am I? And when we think back to a lot of more, both from a religious point of view, but also just from a cultural, spiritual point of view, past generations, how they centered themselves into that. And actually a lot of that centering came from reconnection to nature, to find a connection to self. And I think we can all learn that more in our busy lives.
Absolutely. And I think we also, many of us live in cultures that kind of glorify the idea of not slowing down. So it's very difficult. We are conditioned to, I think, look very highly upon extremely fast individuals, and so we'd like to see that in our dogs as well. Sometimes even if we can't keep it up and stay fast, we'd like our dogs to speed up, to compromise for what we think is a great trait that we should have. Quite the contrary, I think if we can get our dogs to inspire us to slow down and see how it brings out the best in us and the dogs, maybe we'll benefit more from it.
And have you found with your own clients, because I have with mine, that when we invite them, and it is an invitation, we can't make people, of course, when we invite them to see their dog's behavior differently and to switch from a task orientated to more of a care orientated approach, it has huge shifts for them as well in their outlook. And I think when you open a couple of those doors in people's brains, it's amazing where it takes them themselves on their own reappraisal.
Absolutely. I mean, I have had so many clients and students who will frequently actually break down and cry because of, how overwhelming it is, because it tells them a lot about themselves. It tells them a lot about what they're probably struggling with. It's a common feature across most of our courses, where people say, well, I came in to learn about my dogs, but I really ended up learning about myself, because these things are common across individuals, definitely across mammals, but individuals in general, right? So I don't think it's actually such earth-shattering, novel, new things, really. And there have been a lot of cultures around the world who have recognized this, and we're kind of late to the party. We're not at the front of the game, but we absolutely see that. And like you said, task versus care, also questioning that power dynamic, questioning how we use, with dogs, here's the truth, we are in a place of power. So identifying and training yourself not to continue to abuse that, to say, okay, I know I have power over you. I know I can hold this treat and say, you will do what I ask you to do, and you will do it in the way I want you to do it, and you will look happy doing it. And that's when you're going to get it. I know I have that power. But am I going to be using that? Where am I going to let it go? That's a tremendously important lesson to learn for all of us, because that's kind of what we do to people too, right? The second we're in a place of power, we're thinking about how best to exploit it, and to say that I know I have power, but I won't. And also moving from kind of controlling language to actually negotiating and communicating language, where I say, though I know there is a power imbalance, I will still recognize your full agency, and you will always have a right to say, no, I disagree, I think about it differently. So those are all things that definitely, it's not just with dogs, it's definitely very life-changing, because then we start realizing that, hey, this is what we're doing with people too, and I'm not very sure if that's the right thing for me to do, whether it's my employee or child or spouse or a friend who I just have a little bit more power over, whatever it is.
So much truth and wisdom in all that. And I think, I don't know whether it's kind of part of the human condition. It's definitely part of the human condition, and based in the society we live at the moment, this notion of seeking validation, often through control, and often through expression of power. There's a famous sketch over here back in the UK with John Cleese and the two Ronnies. This is a bit of a reference for UK people, but they had the three people because they were all different heights.
Yeah.
And you had, I look down on you and I look up to you, and that kind of, we've all kind of been brought up in this kind of notion that, so if we can actually do the looking down bit, that actually makes us feel a bit better. And I think we all of us, whether it's from a socioeconomic point of view, from a gender point of view, from a sexuality point of view, knows what it's like to have your behavior kind of dictated from another, expectations put on you. And I think dogs are perhaps the last bastion of that within the domestic environment. And this is the true essence for me about what you said there. When we think about this, it's recognizing the power that we have through training, not just operant training, but any kind of training or conditioning, and actually really stepping back and asking that question, the why now, because we're really good at the how. Even conditioning, you were talking earlier about when you were talking about your dog and the kind of social choices she makes, and how we can feel the need to rush in with something, or we need to counter condition that. What are we actually counter conditioning, and what are we creating instead
Yeah.
And it comes back to this thing about internal value for that dog, or just getting that dog to give something we think, oh, that's more normal.
Yeah.
That has no support for that dog.
Yeah. And quite honestly, it's really, and I do feel sometimes that we find it very hard not to be arrogant. And I'm not talking about the outside world. I'm actually talking entirely about myself now. I think through my learning journey, the more you learn, the more you feel like, okay, now I know so much about dogs that I know what's right for you. And something that happened about a year and a half ago was hugely humbling for me, because I had done my myotherapy. I had learned, everything about, not everything. I had learned everything I thought there was to learn about gait and movement and functional movement and so on and so forth. I had been teaching it. I did very well in my class. So, I'm thinking that, hey, I got this. And so I'm working with Nishi. She's struggling to walk, and I'm trying to get her to do this exercise that I do believe is absolutely the right one for her. And I believe this so strongly, but she's just not really interested in doing it. So I said, what can happen? Let me tell her, lure her with a little bit of food. So I have this food and I tell her, you know what, if you walk this thing, if you do this exercise, I'm going to give you this treat. I was trying to get her to walk on a particular surface. And just so that I could kind of, I didn't want to put too much pressure on her. So I did also offer her that if you choose not to do it, also I'll give you the treats. But, I am going to feel happier if you do it the way I want you to do. And that's going to show. And Nishi, being the incredible dog that she was, she chose to do that to make me happy. But the thing is, and that's what I learned then, she was saying, I don't want to do this for a reason. She couldn't. She tripped. She fell. She tore her ACL. She never recovered from it. And that's when I really, I think I had to take a step back and ask myself, where do I come from? And I believe so strongly that this is the right thing for you. And trying to get you to behave the way I want you to. It's a very difficult one, right? It's a very difficult one when we can't help it. It's not badgering. I think we're doing it with the best interest of the dog in mind. We are.
And that's really important. And thank you for sharing that, because I think we can all think back, not just with our dogs, but in our relationships, actually, where we haven't really offered a choice. We kind of feel we have, but this is why I'm really into this notion of us being more truthful. And you've seen that and been more truthful around that, and also recognizing that in any relationship there is compromise. There is, especially when we're in a caregiver role, we have to sometimes make a judgment. I kind of know you're not going to like this, but I feel that it's best for you and your welfare. And sometimes we get that right and sometimes we get that wrong. And that's a big responsibility that we have sometimes. And I think as long as we're open to being mindful about what that truth is, I think that's important. And it's funny how we celebrate so much, like, oh, the biddable dog. Oh, this dog's so biddable. Isn't that great? And isn't great? Without realizing what that actually means, actually, what we're actually subjecting with that dog. When we think then, I can't believe it, the time has flown by, Sindhoor. This is crazy. We're going to be having you in for a chat with Kim and Kathy in the new year, aren't we? With Beyond the Opera, and so there's more chance there, and that'll be a really, oh my god, that'll be a deep dive, I'm sure, with everybody in the room there. When you think about what you've learned through your own dogs, but also the observations you've done of the street dogs, and also seeing them transition into the home, a big thing that comes up a lot is this notion of allowing the individual dog to learn from them first, then we build from there, right? What are the big lessons that you've learned, the big takeaways, the things that you could, if you only had a few minutes to speak to somebody now and you really need to tell them something about inviting them to rethink some of their thoughts on dogs, what would they be?
I think the biggest thing for me would be that we need to recognize, respect and appreciate the knowledge that the individuals have, at least about themselves and their reality. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing for me is we don't always come from a place where we even recognize that there is knowledge, let alone respect it or appreciate it. It's our knowledge that we bring in that we're so, we have a great amount of hubris about. But I think the humility to recognize that another has better knowledge than us about at least their own lived realities, if not about other things as well. And if we really paid attention, we might learn a different way of even looking at the world if we learn to look at it from their perspective. And in order to be able to read them, I think we do have to spend more and more time learning how to read them, read their language, not from a what can I instruct you, but just can I observe you over and over and over, it's a skill that you can just keep developing. I don't know, a decade, 2 decades. And I see Ture doing it after 5 decades. She still sits there trying to get better at her skill of observing dogs and trying to understand their reality. So I think that would be my highlight.
I love what you said there about the knowledge of an individual. They've got the best knowledge of themselves and trying to be available for that. And I think the thing about observations, I think we need to educate more. I know you do with your students, and I know Tura does, and I know Sheila Harper and others, Sarah Fisher. But I think as a community, we need to learn more, not just about what we're looking for, but actually have to be available to do good observations, those observations without judgment and label, and to allow ourselves just to be connected to the anecdotal sometimes in what we see, and just join some of the dots and think, well, that's the 3rd time I've seen that in that situation. Maybe that's not a question mark for this dog. Maybe that is part of their truth.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's not easy. I mean, quite honestly, we don't even do that well with people, right? We don't listen, even when they're talking our language and what we understand. It's funny how sometimes I'm saying this in English, you and I are speaking English, but what I'm saying is landing so differently on you because you only hear what you want to hear, and same of me. And it gets compounded even more when you're looking at an animal who is talking an entirely different language that's not verbal. And so I think it does take a lot of practice to say, don't go. And this was the hardest part for me, which is I observe, and then what do I do with that observation? Nothing, just sit back, observe. Something will emerge out of that will kind of guide you on what the animal needs or what the animal is trying to tell you. And maybe the message at the end of it is back off, you have nothing to do here. They're dealing with their lives fine, which I might not like to hear, but that might happen too. So I think, without expectation, without judgment is a very hard thing to do. So if anybody who is able to do that, I hear you, it's difficult. I struggle with it too, but that is the journey.
And it is really hard. And I think when I've worked with clients and we've gone through observational things, I know at the early part of that, they're not quite cognitively processing it because they still are holding on to a belief about that dog. But when we help them to start doing better observations, they come back to us then and say, actually, I see that differently now. And, when we think about being available to the truth of another, we must also recognize that includes how they process themselves about what's going on around them. And we can see why the dominance model, for example, is so alluring to many people because it fits a lot of the frailties of our own judgments. We can label it, brilliant, we love a label, right? And that's invariably a bad thing, great. And I can have control over it because I've got to counter that myself. So it's just so alluring as part of the human condition as a way of dealing with another.
Well, yes, human condition, I'm not sure, but capitalism for sure. Right? It's a part of that. So I can totally, that's actually what my first paper at college was all about, which is to say 2 things. One is it's at the heart of capitalism, and the other is so much of animal behavior has been heavily influenced by a certain demographic, which is, Euro-American male ideology. Do all cultures look at it the same way? A lot of what we study in animal science is based on what we choose to study. We have spent so much time studying sort of the dominant structures of so many animals. We've not spent as much time studying the affiliate behaviors of animals. I hardly see any literature on that. I mean, it's there, but so few and far apart. The same behaviors that we see if we actually present it to somebody who comes from a completely matrilinear culture of a different part of the world, what would they see? Would they see dominance as the primary thing that is, sort of the preoccupation of all the animals? I think it's what we choose to see, and that's heavily influenced by a lot of things, not just our culture, our education, our sex, our gender, all of that. So I think being a little bit reflexive on that could help.
I think that's so important, and I share some of your thoughts there, especially on this notion of how we label some structures and some relationships within the animal world based upon our own dynamic, which is really interesting, I think, and everybody question that.
Yeah.
So I think this is just going to be a really amazing chat for people. I think both professionals, but also we have a lot of caregivers and trainers and groomers and dog walkers and others within the group. And I think of all the talks, what you do and your work is really at the kind of base of a lot of this stuff. It's part of that deep foundation for this, because we're not just thinking about things in a two-dimensional way, which we can do sometimes. It's looking at these dogs who you've observed sharing their truth in a very natural way, and they kind of day-to-day. I loved how you referenced politics earlier, that they have that, right? That's there, and it's the relationships, and it's the communication of need, and all these kind of wonderful things that are going on all the time in those areas. And I highly recommend anybody who hasn't got it yet, Dog Nose. Now, I had to get my copy of Dog Nose on Kindle because it wasn't available in print, but is it available in print in Europe yet? Do you know?
No, it may not be. I've seen some people find it, but it may not be out yet. I think right now only the digital version is out by HarperCollins.
Okay, right. Okay, well, definitely get it however you can. Tell us a little bit about your school as well, Sindhoor, before we go. And also let us know how people can find out more about your work.
Right. So I think the best way to find out about me is to read the book, because so I have it right there. And I think that kind of bared my heart out there. So it's all there. What I run is a school called Barks. So we offer, the main offering there is a diploma for professionals. It's a UK accredited level 4 diploma, but we also offer 2 more courses. One is on Udemy, which is just on calming signals. So I think it's great for professionals, particularly if you can get your clients to start seeing the dogs, then your conversation with them gets easier, because you have an ally in the dog as well, right? So a lot of times, rather than trying to preach to them what is right and wrong for the dog, I find that if I can just equip them to read the dog, they do much better. They come back with great insights that I would never have. So definitely consider, you can look at that and look at whether it's right for your clients. We also have a foundational course called Canine Essential 101. And I like this course because we talk a lot about not just dog body language, but also how they read and interpret our body language, because this is something that we don't fully understand, is how powerful, how excellent, extraordinary dogs are at reading our body language. It's a whole other conversation where I can demonstrate to you through stories of street dogs that I think if there was one thing that I would think is a evolutionary advantage that dogs have, it is their ability to read humans. They're extraordinary. So being a bit more mindful about that gives us a chance to communicate better. So I think that's kind of the heart of what we do at Barks, and that's the weekend, the short workshop that we offer.
That's the big irony, isn't it? Because this wonderful animal has really sussed us out, worked us out, knows how kind of complicated we are, and yet we are still struggling to kind of. I think what's happening now within the community is really focusing our minds on that now. About, okay, hang on, we've done the how really well for a long time. Now we need to start thinking about the why, and also the authenticity of the why for the dog, and that's why I think your work is so important in this. Well, thank you so much, Sindhoor. I really love this chat today, and just to let everybody know that our next chat is with the wonderful Amber Batson.
She's good.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. On the 8th of December, make sure I haven't missed one out here. 8th of December, and then we've got Sarah Fisher on the 11th of December, which is a real treat that week. We've got two amazing people to have a chat with. And yeah, thank you so much for today, Sindhoor. I really appreciate it. And we'll speak soon, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity. I loved it.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. And thank you, everybody who's tuned in.